Imagine two snapshots of China. In 2016, it was an elite, employee, hardworking, but constantly checking the account balance of Western approval before making a move. It lived with that specific, low-grade tension of dependency. Fast forward to 2026, and the architect now owns the firm. Under Xi Jinping, China didn't just grow, it built a machine. Crossing the geopolitical millionaire threshold, Beijing has silenced the background noise of the old order. With a power portfolio of EVs, AI, and a massive navy, they finally have the autonomy to say number. I'm Tom, and this is Tom's Knowledge. Phase 1. The Great Accumulation, 2016 to 2019, the quiet shifting of the math. In 2016, the world looked at China and saw a high-performing employee, reliable, hardworking, but ultimately operating within a financial and geopolitical system designed by others. Its GDP sat at roughly $11 trillion. To the casual observer, it was just another year of growth in a long string of them. But in the math of nations, this was the moment the background noise began to change. This wasn't just accumulation, it was the start of a structural pivot that would eventually turn the factory of the world into the architect of the world. Between 2016 and 2019, China stopped merely saving its paycheck and started building a machine. This is the period where they moved from low-grade financial tension, the need to say yes to every Western trade deal, to building the ceiling of their own future. Through the Made in China 2025 initiative, they shifted the goalposts. They were no longer content with the $4 margin on a sneaker. They wanted the $40,000 dominance of the electric vehicle, EV, battery, the semiconductor, and the aerospace sector. They were doing the math in their head on a Sunday night. Realizing that to reach the next level, they had to stop bumping against the ceiling of Western technology. At the same time, the Sang Keen Van Dai Va Conduong, BRICS, exploded across the map. China wasn't just building roads, they were acquiring the securities-backed line of credit of global geopolitics. By investing hundreds of billions into ports from Piraeus to Djibouti, they were buying the Friday afternoon of the global supply chain. They were ensuring that, in the future, they wouldn't have to check their account balance of Western approval before moving their goods or extending their influence into the global south. The psychological inflection point arrived in 2018. By removing presidential term limits and enshrining Tu Tuong Tap Can Bin into the constitution, the Vigilance Script of the Chinese state became permanent. They weren't just playing the game anymore, they were preparing to own the court. When the trade war began in 2018, it didn't slow the machine, it simply proved to Beijing that the financial margin to say no to Western demands hadn't arrived yet. But it was coming. They spent these 4 years grinding through the discipline of the first 100,000. Knowing that once the portfolio of global influence reached a certain scale, the acceleration would be genuinely hard to believe. Phase 2. The stress test, 2020 to 2022, the high-stakes recalibration. If Phase 1 was about accumulation, 2020 to 2022 was the ultimate stress test. This wasn't just a global health crisis for China. It was a moment to prove that their background noise of social control could be scaled into a total operating system. This period represented the Vigilance Script in its purest form, a relentless, top-down calculation that prioritized structural stability over short-term pleasure. In 2020, as the world's investment accounts went into the red and global supply chains fractured, China used its zero-COVID policy to build a firewall around its economy. The math was simple: short-term isolation for long-term dominance. For 2 years, they were the only major economy with a functioning, predictable machine, allowing them to capture even more global market share while the rest of the world was doing math in their head about whether they could afford to reopen. But like a high-net-worth individual who becomes more anxious as they get richer, Beijing's watchfulness intensified. The low-grade financial tension of the past was replaced by a high-grade demand for absolute certainty. The structural shift moved inward, targeting the very wealth they had created. In 2021, the state triggered a margin call on its own billionaires. The crackdown on Alibaba and Tencent, and the introduction of the Common Prosperity Tin Vong Chung decree sent a clear message. The number in your account is only productive if it serves the party's architecture. They were willing to wipe out over $1 trillion in market value to ensure that private interests didn't bump against the state's ceiling. This wasn't a loss, it was a Roth conversion of power, paying a heavy price now to ensure total control later. Simultaneously, the Hong Kong national security law in 2020 and the managed collapse of the Evergrande real estate bubble in 2021 showed that China was willing to let old, inefficient models of growth die. They were moving away from the lifestyle creep of debt-fueled property and into the sophisticated investments of the future. By the end of 2022, after the 20th Party Congress secured Xi Jinping's third term, the machine had been stripped of its dissenting parts. The professional overhead was high, and the social tension was a constant hum. But the architect was now the only one left in the room with the keys to the vault. Phase 3. The acceleration, 2023 to 2025, crossing the $1 million threshold. In the world of personal finance, there is a specific, almost magical number where your portfolio starts earning more than your paycheck. For China, the window between 2023 and 2025 was that exact inflection point. This was the era of the acceleration, where the compounding interest of a decade's worth of disciplined investment in green technology and high-end manufacturing finally shifted into a gear that was, quite frankly, hard for the West to believe. The machine was no longer just running, it was outperforming the architect. By 2024, China wasn't just participating in the global energy transition, they had achieved an accredited investor status in the planet's future. Whether it was the lithium in a battery or the silicon in a solar panel, the world's green transition now carried a Made in China watermark. They crossed a threshold where the Luke Luong San Shuat Chat Luong Hua, new quality productive forces, AI, EVs, and semiconductors, became more productive than the old, crumbling real estate model ever was. The machine was now running quietly in the background, generating influence faster than Western sanctions or de-risking strategies could take it away. To match what China's portfolio of green tech was earning, the rest of the world would have needed to invest at rates they simply couldn't afford. But the most significant change wasn't the luxury of a higher GDP, it was the autonomy. In 2025, with the full operational status of the Fujian aircraft carrier and a nuclear arsenal reaching 600 warheads, China gained the security-backed line of credit to say number. They said no to the Western tech blockade by launching DeepSeek AI and domestic high-end chips that defied every export control. They said no to the US dollar's background noise by leading the massive expansion of BRICS Plus and pushing Fai du Lawa, de-dollarization, to a point of no return for the global South. Like Marcus in our story, who finally turned down a project he hated because his account hit a certain number. China stopped caring about the low-grade financial tension of Western approval. They were no longer doing the math in their head before making a move in the South China Sea or setting global tech standards. They had bought back their time and their agency. The Friday afternoon of global geopolitics had arrived, and for the first time in a century, the leadership in Beijing went home with nothing they were dreading on Monday, because they were the ones now writing the global schedule. So, that is what 1 million in geopolitical net worth actually buys. The Friday afternoon with nothing to dread on Monday. China has spent a decade building a machine that now runs faster than the world can restrain it. They've moved past the low-grade anxiety of the 2016 era and into a 2026 reality where they finally have the power to say no. But as we've seen, the goalposts never stop moving. The higher the net worth, the higher the stakes. Is this a new era of global stability? Or are we just watching a bigger version of the same old math? If you want to keep tracking the structural shifts that are changing the math of your life, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Tom's Knowledge community. Give this video a like if you learned something today. It helps the machine keep running. I'm Tom, and I'll see you in the next analysis.